This is Westbury Analytics Radio, where ServiceNow Performance Analytics for senior executives comes alive. Experienced ServiceNow architects, performance management experts, and other executives in your field share insights for how to drive performance management using the power of ServiceNow Performance Analytics. I am your host, Pedro Soto. If you're an IT or HR leader at an organization using ServiceNow, you most likely have heard about performance analytics. You may even be using it. But are you and your team using it to its maximum potential? Is it delivering actionable insights on the business goals that matter to you? Performance analytics is a game changer, but it requires a different way of thinking than how most people think of reporting and metrics. Our goal here is to help you develop that new way of thinking. So without further delay, let's jump into today's interview with my guest, Robert Fedoruk, and let's look at how to think about process improvement in performance analytics. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us. This is Pedro Soto with Westbury Analytics, and joining me is Robert Fedoruk. Did I get that right that time, Robert?
Got it right that time. That's great.
All right. Appreciate that. Thanks for joining us, Robert. Want to start by letting you tell our audience a little bit about your background, when you got started with ServiceNow, so they can get a flavor for the quality of the experience from which you're speaking.
Well, I like to tell people that I was born 12 years ago. Prior to that, somebody in my body was doing ITSM work with various tools, Remedy, Magic Total Service Desk, if anybody remembers that far, or HP Service Desk. And I really didn't do anything exciting in life. I kind of just spent my days reorganizing category trees and doing really low-level, low-value stuff. And then we were so frustrated with HP Service Desk that we kind of just Googled one day. This is 12 years ago, but we just ran into Google. What's better than HP Service Desk? And up came ServiceNow. And so we, from that point, I think it was about 4 weeks later, we actually had ServiceNow bought, and we were in the middle of deploying it. And we deployed ITSM on ServiceNow in a matter of weeks. And then we were kind of saying, well, what can we do with it beyond just deploying ITSM? We cracked open the service catalog and we built an order guide for our freelancer onboarding process, which was kind of bread and butter to the business. And we reduced that significantly, really significantly, moved the bottom line of a gigantic multinational corporation kind of successful.
Wow.
And then from that, the request for more stuff just poured in because everybody wanted to see that kind of improvement everywhere. But I've always been really keen on the reporting side. If I'm gonna excuse the word, waste time entering data manually into ServiceNow, I had better have some kind of payoff for it. And so it either better be a visible improvement in the process, or something that just makes my life a lot easier. So I guess that's a long-winded way of saying, yes, I've been in ServiceNow for a while. I love all aspects of the tool. I've gone very, very wide, but the one thing I keep coming back to is why bother? And why bother is something you can only answer with the reporting and analytics engines.
So you said something that was really interesting, because you said there's got to be a payoff. And one of the probably key payoffs is improvement in the process. Tell us a little bit more about that, because that is actually one of our core pillars in the methodology that Westbury uses to implement performance analytics. But tell me what you have seen, or what you mean by improvement in process improvement.
I try to be a little bit agnostic about the process, even the efficacy of the process, because in my mind, process is not natural. Nobody wakes up in the morning. Instinctual processes are natural, right? But it takes a while to get them instinctual. Every other kind of process, the imposed process, is counter-instinctual. It's not something we naturally like as human beings. And so like the example, my dad was an infantryman, and so I remember being a little kid and watching him march on parade, and like hearing him tell about how like when he first joined the army, they would do nothing for weeks but train them how to march. And it wasn't because like there's a reason for that, and it's because what matters in a war is getting as many people as we can to the exact same spot at the exact same time. Does me no good to have 15 guys show up early and then 100 guys after that and then 900 guys after that. Yeah. So process is really about outcomes that we want to maximize or outcomes that we want to minimize, and there's no other reason to have a process beyond that.
Yeah.
So the process itself, when we talk about improvement of process, it's like how much I have difficulty answering that question, but what's a really easy question to answer is what outcomes is this process maximizing or minimizing? And then let's measure that, because it might not be the process that's the problem. Does that make sense?
Yeah, could be the outcome. You're right. Agreed.
Yeah, you're either making better progress or better goals.
It's one of the things that we do as well is and this is foundational whenever we start working with a client. What we have observed is when it comes to analytics and reporting, the community comes from 20 plus years being conditioned to a reporting mindset where it was difficult to really focus on the outcome. And so people would just say, hey, we need to measure this. We need to measure MTTR. We need to measure FCR. Let's go build a report. And in the first phases that we launched a performance analytics project, I'd like to hear what you've observed is we have to work on changing a mindset a little bit to, no, look, we'll get to the KPIs and we'll get to all the features of the report. Let's focus on the outcome, the business outcome, the critical success factor that needs to be measured too. And once you define that, then you can build the analytics environment that you need for that. Has that been your experience?
Oh, man. It's the one thing that makes me cringe every time. It's like nails on a chalkboard. It's like we have to quote unquote do reporting. It'll be a scope that's just like, and this super specific thing, and this super specific thing, and this super specific thing, and this one, and this one, and this one, and do reporting. And it's like, whoa, that's all backwards. That's all backwards. And the do reporting stuff is just, it's not like, oh man, like I just found this great plot of land. Let's do some construction.
Yes.
Like, what are we building? A fence? A house? An airport? Like, it's an afterthought. And you can tell it's an afterthought when someone puts a document like that in front of you. It just reeks of somebody said, holy cow, like, and we got to do reporting, but they don't know what they're going to do. And if you don't know what you're going to do, like, how on earth are you going to find out if this was worth it or not? You're actually physically paying money to get something, and you don't know if it's going to move the needle.
Yep. I love the metaphor. It's like having a plot of land and let's go build stuff. And without blueprint, without a stated definition or vision or picture of what it is that you're going to end up affecting or impacting.
It's hard, right? People think about features that are cool, and they think about features that are cool first. They think about processes and the features context within them second. And for some reason, the last in line is the outcomes that they're trying to maximize or minimize.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. Yeah. You got it right. Yeah. And it's exactly the mirror image of that, isn't it? It's the outcomes, then the process, then the features, the data, the details down at the working level. So what, in your experience, obviously you've run across this and you've had engagements, what have you noticed helps folks make that switch, make that mindset shift, besides having a consultant bring them back to that? That's our job. But in addition to that, in addition to a consultant being solidly grounded in that understanding and bringing them back to that, what experiences do you have that helps folks make that shift, a change in perspective and understanding?
So I always try and I hang my hat on people's emotions. That's how you get the most reliable movement in the changing of people's minds. Like, you can throw numbers at people all day long, right?
Yeah.
You can be as objective as possible, but nobody moves without emotive force. And so if I'm ever, and it's rare, right? But if I'm ever in a position where people aren't thinking about some way where they need to see improvement, right? Then I go the route of, sorry, why are you bothering with this, right? Like, I look, I'm not cheap, right? I'm sure you guys aren't either. So why are you paying me all this money, right? It's suspicious. Like, aren't you afraid somebody's going to give you a whooping if you deploy this, you spend all this money off of it, and then sometime later you can't tell if the needle has moved, right? And then there's all kinds of like fear and doubt that gets introduced into that.
Yeah.
And which, I mean, they're terrible negative emotions, but they're also very emotive, forceful emotions that cause people to change their mind. So if I have a situation where people are unsure, or they're focused on build but not outcomes of the build, then I usually play that game. On the other side of the spectrum, and I find this pretty polar, like they're either like they don't understand about why they need to measure against outcomes, or they go on the other side of the spectrum where they're like, there's 300 indicators out of box, let's deploy all of them, right? on a single homepage, on a single tab of a single homepage. And those people, it's more of like, okay, let's walk this back a bit, because organizations can only change so much so fast. Right? Even if you think about hardcore ServiceNow deployments, the best of them and the most storied versions were worlds where the situation was so terrible beforehand that everything naturally, like, people were excited to change. You're lucky to get those scenarios. In most cases, you're dealing with just kind of like somebody's getting a payoff for this, for everybody to change. So you can't rely on the idea that everybody's just going to change with you. So you have to be careful about how much of this PA analytics or reporting or anything that speaks to outcomes, how much of it you push through at once. I had this one company that they had a really explosive growth. They went from like mom and pop local to very like basically like dominated their state, and then they were going like national with their business. And so they knew that their operations weren't scaling. So they basically paid a ton of money to come in and have like basically like an ITIL layer put over the top of their technology organization.
Yep.
Right. Let's at least get processes done right. And so when after they had done all that spend and gone through all the organizational change to make that happen, then all of a sudden the executives were like, whoa. We just spent a ton of money doing this ITIL thing. Was that worth it? Right. So now they're thinking about outcomes, not before, now. And everybody's worried, like, holy cow, we got to prove that this was right. What do we do? Let's do everything. So drag out that dashboard, put every indicator on it. And partners came in and just like slapped stuff on top of stuff on top of stuff. And then, but nothing was like, nobody was being convinced of anything. And so that was like the shortest and best PA job of my life, was kind of like just say, hey, listen, why don't we strip this down to like 3 things and talk about that? Well, what 3 things do we do? Well, what 3 things are you getting beat up about? Right? What are you stressing out about? What are your customers lambasting you for? Yeah, that's really easy to answer. Okay, let's do those 3 things. It's not that we don't ever do the other things. It's that we ingest these things, digest these things, process these things. And once we get used to that, then we add more spice, more flavor.
I like that. I'm tracking. So for instance, earlier you said, when I have folks that need to be focused on outcome and to be more effective with what they do with PA, or really any of the other things they're doing on ServiceNow, is, why are you bothering with this? So the next one is, what 3 things are you getting beat up about? So I like how you're
bringing that and making it a little more specific. What other cool, powerful questions do you tend to ask because you know they're effective and you know they help focus on the real issues?
Yeah, what do you get beat up about is easy because people will
Avoid
avoid pain more than they'll pursue gain,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
That question kind of took me by surprise because you really have there's like, what are you getting beat up about? And then there's also like, what makes this spend worthwhile?
Yeah.
Right. Another thing I'll say is like, when I'm trying to encourage people to think about PA at the front end, right? If I can move that needle at all, I'll ask things like, what do you want to show on day 2 of your deployment on whether you're getting better or worse? So I think a lot of people are used to a paradigm where it's like, oh, we're doing a tool shift. We're moving project management from MS Project to ServiceNow. And then 6 months later, someone says, was that $250,000 spend worth it? I don't know. What can we check out now? But what you can live in is a world where it's like, we went live today. Tomorrow, a PA job runs, and even though it's going to be only 4 pixels wide, we're going to see that stuff changed. And so we're either identifying places where we got better, yay, the money was worth it. Places where we got worse, yay, we identified where we need to apply efforts now. Or C, our goals are way off. We got to change our goals. I don't know if I answered your question, Pedro.
No, you did. Thank you. But I want to go into another area that is fascinating to me, and this is related to process and how organizations use KPIs or reporting to quote unquote police the performance of individuals and groups. Our view is that highly effective use of whether it's reporting or analytics is to, like you said, understand better how the process is either maximizing or minimizing a defined outcome. What's been your experience when you go into organizations where they're not really there yet, but they're very much coming from a mindset of policing individual or group statistics, isolated from a holistic view of process and outcomes?
So my first thought is, there's probably a lot you can improve on before you police individuals.
Right.
I really hesitate to weaponize data against individuals as much as I can. Because I think PA, you just got so much runway. Like, that seems to me like a marginal gain, right? But you have so much runway to see other stuff to improve before you got to start like really policing people. Groups, on the other hand, that offers a layer of anonymity where we could say, hey, look, guys, it's not personal. This is just the way it is. Let me just color that in a little bit. Why I hate policing individuals, because usually there's something else amiss with the data. Like, I remember one initiative that I had no part of, where people pulled data from ServiceNow, like how much time are people spending on tickets, the old time worked field incident. And what ended up happening was they lambasted their very best people. They just took them to town. WTF is wrong with you guys? How come this number's so low? Well, because they were spending all their time mentoring everybody else. But it didn't matter because the numbers said that their time on ticket was too low, which I think is just a BS way to operate. And the danger of that is just, there's too much risk of that when you start policing it down to the individual level. So get it down to the group level so you can at least identify a area of investigation, which might be human and it might not be human. If that makes sense. Now, an example where getting it down to group level was super useful was our service desk was getting kind of the wrong combination of really old tickets and multiple assignment hops.
Mm.
And so they were kind of like, but they were measured separately, right? So it was like, oh, you're doing bad on assignment hops, which means you're not assigning it to the right groups. Do better, right? And then also, these tickets are taking too long, which means you're not working hard enough. Do better. I'm using like just really general kind of generalizations, right? But when we kind of like looked at that together, we used metric instances to do reporting off of this, right? The like pre-PA stuff.
Yep.
Where we looked at the amount of time things spent in each group for a given assignment group. So get me all the metric instances for incidents that are assigned to the service desk, and that'll tell me all the group assignments and the durations.
Yep.
And what we found was that there was one group that the service desk would assign to, and then that group would assign it back to the service desk way later. So it was like, on the surface, the numbers showed that the service desk was, quote unquote, doing badly, right? But once you dug down, you realized that the problems manifest at the service desk. The problems incur at some other place entirely. And that came down to a simple misunderstanding of process. This team thought that the service desk was kind of the front and center and did all communications with the customer, so they would get done with a ticket. They had no SLA, so there was no compulsion for them to move any faster. And then the service desk would just take the hit because the service desk did have an SLA.
You were touching on SLAs there incidentally as we got to the end of that. What's your experience? What's your feel for in the universe of clients you've consulted with are doing a decent job or an effective job of working with SLAs? We tend to find big gaps.
With
What's
SLAs.
Been your experience? They either don't have them, or they're poorly defined, or they're getting by.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of getting by. I call it like the greater good benefit. Like maybe the SLAs aren't being used in kind of like a textbook way an SLA should be used, but there's enough force behind the movement to improve a general quality indicator. Like all things being equal, we want tickets to take less time than more time, right? And so
right.
putting in poorly defined SLAs still puts you on a better direction than not having them. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So like I'm all about making that way better, and there's 1,000 ways we can articulate that to our customers. But I'd rather people be doing it, I don't want to say badly. I'd rather them be doing it not well than not doing it. Now, in terms of the worst mistakes to make, or rather the easiest mistakes to improve your SLA paradigm, I think is just to really understand the difference between, like, kind of just read the ITIL chapter summary on SLAs and realize that there's SLAs, OLAs, and underpinning contracts. And to do this well in ServiceNow requires a lot more SLA records than you're probably used to dealing with. A lot, and a ton of maintenance. Because you're going to have different underpinning contracts with different vendors, different OLAs with different groups inside your company. And the SLAs are going to get real specific real quick. Okay? But the way this manifests when you're not doing it right, when you're not articulating the difference between OLA and SLA, is you get these weird paradigms where they want you to stop the clock if it's on a certain team. Or if this team says if this team's working on it, you got to get it to create I'm really having trouble articulating this, but you just get these weird rules, especially when it comes to clock pausing, that has bug fat zero to do with what you're promising your customer. And in fact, it works against that. Like, don't ever pause the ticket on something that you haven't articulated to the customer. It's not about you getting or avoiding the slap on the wrist. It's about the customer getting something that was agreed to.
Robert, do you help clients with that work or not really? Your focus is more on the architecture of the solutions.
Yeah, I definitely consider that like within the architecture scope.
Okay.
Because I think a lot of people just they want to get SLAs defined and deployed in like 1 day of 1 week of their ITSM deployment. You know what I mean? Like that's how they want it done. Like, oh, it's just like there's one for P1, one for T2, P3, 4, 5, and then they'll work like that for a week, and they'll be like, holy cow, this team's getting dinged left, right, and center. Let's put in some kind of weird pause mechanism just for them, and then you just like it goes on and on and on, and then you have this terrible snarled up SLA. So architecture scope would be, listen, guys, do what you want, but this is how you should really go on SLAs. And I will do that all day long. I haven't done it lately. I think some of my first adventures in ServiceNow was trying to steer that ship. But it's a hard ship to steer. Like you're dealing with like decades of the way people worked in other tools, and they're kind of like expectations. There's a lot of like market re-education, and it's just there's a huge gap between I think what the textbooks say and what people implement. So it's real hard. I'll tell you another thing that drives me just bonkers is this idea of did the incident meet the SLA? They always want to think about that as a binary question on a single record, and I'm like, I always have these conversations. Did the incident meet what SLA?
Right.
The crickets chirping, the big wide eyes. What do you mean? Well, did I promise you that I would respond in a certain amount of time? Yes, you did. Did I promise you that I would resolve it in a certain amount of time? Yes, you did. Did some other team promise me that if I forward it to them, they'll get something? Yes, they did. I'm like, we've got like 3, 4, 5 different promises all hinged on this record. And it's not about did the ticket meet the SLA. It's what manners of promises did this ticket
keep?
Yeah, make or break. And that's been like, I think if just in the realm of SLAs, that's the battleground that I have most waged war on, is getting people to think about multiple expectations on their records and not just the SLA.
Yeah.
All right, totally.
Excellent. Yeah. No, good. No, I wanted to know that because when we run into that, we're not equipped, and nor do we want to develop the expertise internally of helping clients improve their whole SLA architecture. But PA has a real effective way of shining a light on very deficient SLA programs. And, I mean, real quick, real fast.
Yep, and that's I ranted for a bit, but I can't say enough. It's like not having it at all is way worse than,
Yeah.
What's the word? Half-assed is still only half as assed as full-assed. Can we say that on TV? I'm sorry.
Yeah. This is raw. Awesome. Hey, Robert, I want to thank you so much. Your time is valuable, and I don't want to overstay my welcome because I want to invite you again on our podcast and YouTube broadcasts. A couple of things. Where would people look you up if they found something interesting here that they'd like to pursue further with you, other partners or clients, primarily clients?
Yeah, that's a great question. The website is still on its way up. I would say you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. There's not too many Robert Fedorics.
Lastly, share with us, again for the audience primarily, some of the interesting things you're working with, ideas, things that you would want somebody to reach out to you and talk more about with you.
Okay, yeah. So I do a lot of things in the space. 12 years has given me a real blessing to go a lot wider than most people on the platform. So I've done, big ITBM, ITSM, GRC, performance analytics, custom applications, a lot, probably 5-to-1 to everything else.
Wow.
And a lot of advisement on just what's the best way to go about doing this kind of stuff. So right now, my offering to the market is a fractional vendor agnostic architect. So a lot of companies don't need a full-time, all-year architecture guide, right? And frankly, they couldn't afford it anyway. And so what I offer is a fraction of an architect. So call me like, you put me on retainer, you call me, I pick up the phone, and I give you the best advice available. Advice that maybe your vendors couldn't, with most people have 3-4 years experience. I have 12. So, I can go a lot wider. And then also the vendor agnostic part, because now that ServiceNow is really wide, you have vendors specializing. And so it's more important than ever to have an architect that can rein in and ensure vendors operate to, your standards. What are your standards? You don't know because you don't have an architect. So a fractional vendor agnostic architect. Is the game I'm in right now. So if that interests you, I guess got to find a way to find me, right?
Yeah. Let's start by LinkedIn.
Hey, Pedro, thanks for letting me do that pitch, by the way. Didn't have to, but thank you.
No, it's a pleasure. Appreciate it. It's a way to give back to everybody and for you taking the time to chat with us today. All righty. Well, that being said, again, I want to thank you, Robert, and we'll have to do it again sometime.
Yeah, anytime. Thanks so much for the opportunity.
Okay.
All right.
We see a time when all business leaders using ServiceNow Performance Analytics will easily know how to leverage its power to help them reach their business goals. Performance Analytics offers you a way to do that. To discover how you can get there faster, send us an email to info@westburyanalytics.com.